Hi everyone. Today we'll continue looking at the Red Hat Certified Engineer Exam question bank. Next, let's look at question 15. Question 15 is about creating users. It seems pretty simple at first glance, but actually, it's not like we created a user in the primary stage with one command. Well, for the creation of users in question 55, we have requirements. We need to use what we created in the previous question, which is question 14. Specifically, the password database will use this password database to create our users and their passwords. So the passwords come from here. First of all, what we need to pay attention to is that the question requires us to create two users, and these two users need to be created in different host groups. This is something to be careful about. The first user should be created in the DB group and the test group. The second user should be created in the pro group. That's the first point. The second point is that the way the user's passwords are created is different. In the previous question, we actually created two variables, right? To be precise, there are two variables. For these two variables, the first user uses the first variable. Then the second user uses the second variable to generate their password. And then we also need to specify the password validity period, as well as assign the user to a group and so on. These are the basic requirements for this question. When we create users, it's not as simple as just using a single command. In the earlier, more basic questions, it was indeed just a matter of one command, nothing too complicated. But for this intermediate level task, we need to do more. First, we need to use a playbook to accomplish this. And second, we need to, when generating the password, we're no longer just assigning a fixed password like before, right? In the previous, more basic task, we were simply given a specific password to assign. That was very straightforward, just a fixed command, and there was basically no variation. But here, the password you generate is not predetermined. It's a password assigned through a variable, a password generated by a variable. So this is the main requirement of this problem, the main requirement. Just pay attention to these points. First, there are two users, each belonging to a different group with different passwords. And finally, the groups that these users belong to are also different. This point basically amounts to two separate tasks. You could say that the two tasks are completely different in terms of content. You need to pay attention to this point. Previously, most of our tasks had a lot of similarities, right? But in this case, there are quite a few differences in this task, so you must be careful when you write it. First, we need to download the one. First download one. In this case, the problem statement requires us to download first. We can go ahead and download this user list file. To download a user list file, its path is Steel Classroom. Basically, from start to finish, all our file downloads are handled on a single node. So first, let's download this file. Let's switch to our terminal first. All right. After switching to the terminal, the first thing we need to do is, of course, enter our user account. Once we're in, the very first step we need to take is to download our file first. As for the file, it's still located in our most commonly used directory, which is Classroom. And here the file we want to download is called user list, which is our user list file. Let's download it first. After downloading, we can take a look at its contents. This is the user list. We need to create a list of users to be created. Of course, according to the requirements of the task here, what we actually need to do is, here everyone, please pay attention to this one. The basic configuration here, or rather what it includes, which is about these three users. Regarding these three users, the requirement here is actually this. It wants us to create them according to this format, to create them following this format. So first, let's pay attention to this. Let's take note of it. Here, our position is here. These are the job positions for all three of them. These are their respective positions. So what can we see from here? Our users, their three job positions here are, well, different. One of the requirements in the question is to specify that our manager should be placed where? In the pro group, right? Yes, as an additional member of the OPS MGR group. And then another role is another requirement. So here, the three users we create actually have two roles, which means there are two requirements. This is the main requirement of this question. First, everyone should analyze this file and take a look at the differences between these three users. What are their respective positions? Next, we'll officially start creating them. With this hint, we now know that these two users share one position. And this user has a position of their own. So here, first of all, our first step is, let's start by editing our file. Of course, first, let's switch to the answer directory, and then we can directly edit our user's email file. Once inside, as usual, we start with 3 dashes at the top, and then we write our task name. Here, our task name is basically about creating users, right? Creating users. When creating users, the first thing everyone needs to pay attention to is who is our target. So here, we actually have two objectives, right? Basically, there are two tasks, so we'll write them separately here. Yeah, we'll just create user 1 and user 2, so we'll write two of them. For user 1, we'll assign them to the DEV and test groups. For the second user, we'll just assign them to the pro group. So just to clarify, and then what files or variables do we actually need to use here? In this particular situation specifically. Here, the question actually requires us to use something. It asks us to use something. Variables from the previous question. So what was the variable from the previous question? Let's review it. It's right here, isn't it? In our current directory, which is the folder we're working in at the moment, there's a file called locker, YML. This file, locker, YML, is actually one of our variables that we can use in our project. The other variable we have is called user list, which, as the name suggests, is our list of users. So, to recap, we have two variables available: locker, YML, the file in our directory, and user list, which contains the users. The user list file, that's user list YML. Of course, this file isn't in our current directory, right? We can either copy it or cut it, whichever you prefer. Let's exit out of here first and put the file in the correct location, because earlier when we downloaded it, we did so in the home directory. So here, we'll use a cp command. Our home directory is the parent directory. So basically, we're copying the user list file from there into the current directory. Once we've done that, the current directory will also have this user list YML file, which is one of our variables. Let's continue editing. Let's keep editing the file. Next, we'll start writing this variable. As for variables, actually, in most of our exercises, we don't deal with them much. There aren't many involved. The way to write it is to specify the variable file name first, and then specify the exact path. That's how you write a variable file. Previously, we basically haven't covered how to write a variable file. Now, let's use this variable file. Since autocompletion isn't available here, you need to be extra careful when writing make. Sure not to get the file name wrong. If you do, then, right? If you can't find the variable file, it might throw a lot of errors. So here, the path in the front is the same. Please double check and make sure not to make any mistakes. The next two are different. One is locker something, which is the final file from the previous question, and the other is the file we just downloaded for this question. There are two variable files in total, because here, the variable is actually divided into two parts. One is our user information, right? That's our user list. The other is the information about our previous key, right? The key information, or the information for that variable, is in the locker YML file. So, two pieces of information. All right, next, let's officially start creating. But everyone, please pay attention when creating. Be sure to pay attention, even though our group is supposed to be added to the organization, right? But in reality, this group, it actually doesn't exist. So what do we need to do? We need to create the group first, and then create the file. Don't assume that just because the question asks you to put it in this group, the group already exists. Not necessarily. For example, in our beginner level exercises, it's the same situation. The group doesn't exist at first. We create the group first, then create the user, and then add the user to the corresponding group. That's how it works. So here, it's the same way we create the group first, then create the user. Next, let's specify our task. What are we specifying? In our task, the first step is to add our group. Let's set up the group first, and then we'll deal with the user. But the group is just group. As for the name, pay attention to the question here. Don't mix them up. There are two groups in the question, right? Make sure not to confuse the two groups mentioned in the question. For the state, here we set state to present. Then moving on to the next one. The name is. Once the group is set up, what's next? It's the user, right? When creating the user, everyone needs to pay attention. For users here, we need to use variables because we actually have more than one user. The one below is a user because we have a total of 3 users here. The first task has 2 and the second task has 1. These are handled separately, so we need to use variables here. Yes, it uses variables. We'll set the password and user together. Let's handle the user first. As for the user, didn't we just mention it above? Up there, right? That's 21,233 in my name. So for the user's name, the very first thing we need to do is specify a variable for the user's name. So first, let's write the username as. Now, how do we actually write this variable? Well, actually it's the same as before, just use curly brackets, 2 curly brackets, plus 2 spaces. That's the way to write a variable. And that's all there is to it, really. Just remember, curly brackets, 2 of them and 2 spaces, and that's exactly how you do it. All right, this is our username. After the user is created, of course, you can also add options here. However, the way to add options is a bit different from regular commands, right? Normally, we just add an option, like specifying a group name, and that's enough. But here, name refers to the username, and group specifies which group the user should join. We just need to add our group name here, and that's the user's group. With these 2 steps, we've basically finished creating our user. And that's it, it's done. So what's the next step? It's the password. The next step is setting the password. As for the password, here we're also using our variables. We're still using our variables. The variables here are borrowed from the content of the variables in our previous question, the 2 variable contents from the last question. So here, let's first take a look at this. As for how we write it, for the user password, once we've created the user, the next thing is the password. So we just write password. After entering the password, let's add here. Well, this variable is a bit long. It's a bit long. Here, it uses a filtering method. Also, there are actually some conditions below. Here, you definitely need to use conditional statements because without them, you can't determine which one we should use. So, which one should we use? It's about blocking a user, right, to correspond to a certain content. So here, what do we definitely need? We definitely need to do this. First, over here in the seating area, what do we specify? We specify our password because here it asks us to use a variable from the previous question to create it. So we use the variable from the previous question to create it, and here our variable name is the one from the previous question. The first one, yes, the first one. So first, we use quotation marks, then parentheses, let's get the basic format right first, and then we'll start writing the content inside. If we're referencing a new variable, it's this one. Just look at how it was written in the previous question and do the same. It's fine if you don't make any mistakes. And then here, pay attention. There's also a small requirement in the question. Don't overlook this little detail. It asks us to use something specific. So we need to use the SHA-512 hash format to do this. Encryption. So here, besides calling the variable, we also need to use a pipe to further encrypt our password a second time. So here, we need to write the content that needs to be encrypted. All right, this is how we encrypt it. This becomes our password. This is our password. This is essentially using our pipe to generate a password in the required format. And there's another requirement, which is the password validity period, right? There's a requirement for that as well. As for the password validity period, this is set in. Now here, at this stage, we continue to write password. So what is the maximum password validity period? This is also a variable, and we implement it here using a variable. So here, this is our maximum password lifetime. All right, that's the second one. Okay, so now that we've written everything up to here, are we done? No, that's not enough, right? There's no problem using this variable, The password is generated, the user is created, and the group is set up. But there's still one issue: how to create it in this way. Right, we're missing one condition. So here, what we need to do first is, we first need to, in this part, loop through something specifically. Loop through our usernames. Yes, we loop through our usernames, and from these usernames we select one or two to execute the above content. How do we select them? By using our conditional statements. These are the conditional statements we discussed earlier. How do we determine this? Didn't we just have a condition? That is our task score, rather, not exactly a task, but there should be a position. Yes, the position. Which position is it equal to? The solution is already written here, right? That is, it equals this value. Including this variable here, which is also mentioned, right? Is this word. So as long as your position matches it, then we can execute the above mentioned method. A method for creating a user and password. If not, well, sorry. There's another one below, right? Go look for the next one. This is a check. And for the one below, we'll also write another check. The check below is for when the position equals another one, manager. So for managers, this is basically two different checks. By using these two different checks, we separate the two cases. Once we've separated the two cases, we're good up to this point. Yeah, this is our first case, the first situation. Pay attention to these spaces. Just now I missed a space here. Everyone be mindful of spaces and symbols, things like that. If there are too many symbols, even if you get an error later, it's hard to check. So try to get it right the first time you write it, to avoid errors as much as possible. Otherwise, troubleshooting later can be quite difficult, because with too many symbols, it's actually not very precise on our end, you could say. The error messages you get from this command aren't very accurate either. I just spotted another mistake here, so everyone needs to pay extra attention to this. That's the first point. Second, we're going to create a second user, right? So what do we start? Actually, we can start from here. This is basically like having two tasks. In this file, it's as if there are two tasks. The first task is to create two users, right? The second task is to create another user. So here, first of all, and then on the last line, we start writing. The second task is to create user 2. When you're working on the optimization for the second one, the first host group needs to be changed. It should be the pro group. Here, everyone, don't just copy what's above. If you follow the previous example exactly, and you make a mistake, that's it. You'll lose half the points. Of course, if you get half right and half wrong, they won't deduct all your points, right? You'll get the points you deserve. Now, let's move on to the second file, or rather, the second user. Even though the user is created twice, the variables used are actually the same, so you can write the variables the same way as before. That's not a problem. And here, we'll keep things consistent with what we did above. All right, that's one part. The second part is specifying a variable for our user list. The user list variable. Once that's set up, what's next? All right, let's start taking notes. Specific tasks. Similarly, what we need to do first is create a group, because there really isn't one yet. There's no group here, so we need to create one first. So here, let's specify that first. When creating a group, we just need to assign the task here. The first task is to create a group, and the second task is to create a user. Actually, for this problem, we can divide it into two main tasks. Each of these two main tasks contains two subtasks. So first, the initial step here is to create a group name. As for the name here, the second one is, let's see which one the second one is. It's this one. Use this main one. All right, after creating the group, what's next? The next step. Let's first finish creating the group, and the next step is to create the user. When creating the user, first, for the name, it's the same as before. We just write add user 2. Who exactly is user 2? First, write user, then write the name. Here we also use a variable Of course, this variable is actually the result after being filtered and processed by the conditions below. Above, actually, there are 2 users, and below there is 1 user. Then add this user to a certain group. Which group? The group we just specified, right? The one we just created. All right, after specifying that, the next step is the password. As for the password here, first of all, the way to write is the same as above, but the content is different. The requirement here is that we use 2 different variables to create the passwords. So the one above uses 1 variable name and the one below uses another, just to make sure not to mix them up or use the same name for both. Please pay attention to this part. So let's write down the words here first. This is different from the previous task. We opt for the manager variable. The manager's variable. Then we start writing. The encryption method here is the same. The requirement for the encryption method is the same. We use the SHA-512 hash value for encryption. Note that there are quotation marks here. All right, no problem. After this, we've specified 1 variable. Now for the one below, this period is the restriction we set. As for the time, the password validity period, this doesn't have any effect. It's the same as before. Here, first, we use this our variable to specify our maximum validity period. Once we've set the maximum validity period, the next step is to loop through again. In this loop, the entire user list actually only has 3 users, right? We really just have 3 users. So what we're doing here is first looping through the whole user list, and then using our conditional statements. If your position is this one, we use the first method to set it. If your position is the one below, then we use the second method to create it. So here, basically, the final criterion for our judgment is based on the user's position. This is how we distinguish between our 2 types of users. Yes, to categorize the users into 2 types. All right, so by setting it up like this, with these 2 conditional statements, we can separate our 3 users into 2 different cases. Then, for each of these 2 cases, we can specify exactly which group to create and which user to create. We just need to write that out specifically. There are 2 tasks, and honestly, there's quite a lot to do. Even though there are only 2 tasks, there's a lot of content, especially with so many variables. Everyone, please pay attention to the symbols and make sure to get the spaces and everything else correct. So this is what we have here. Question 15. For question 15, of course, even after you've created everything, it's not completely finished. We still need to verify it. The verification for this question is actually quite important. And it's also very easy to make mistakes here because there are just so many symbols in this question. It's usually pretty easy to write the words generally. There aren't too many problems with that, right? Most people can get the words correct. But when it comes to symbols, if you miss a space or add an extra space, or if you... Here we're dealing with our users, YAML file. Right? If you have one more or one less space or an extra or missing symbol, it can all cause problems. So let's go ahead and create it here. The file is quite large. And you also need to reference variables from the previous question. So here, we can wait a moment. Okay, there's no issue with the format. Hey, good news. The first thing is that our format is correct, which is good news. But what's the bad news? The bad news is that when we were adding a group here, there was an error. When we were adding the group, we made a spelling mistake with one of the words. But some of these are reversed. There's a letter here that's written backwards. It's not a big problem right here. All right, let's check the one below to see if it's correct. Let's see if the one below is right. There's no problem with the one below. The one above had a mistake. Let's run it again. This time it's at the step of adding a user. When adding a user, the first issue it specifies is that the part where we specify the variable right here, when specifying the variable. Here, it's specifying the variable for our first user, the variable on the user side. Let's take a look at this variable. First, the name is, there's no problem with the name. Then, when specifying the password encryption, password hash is also fine. The brackets are our encryption method, no problem. Well, take a look here. Line 12, column 5, right? It points us to the specific location, line 12, column 5. Let's check it. Line 12, column 5. Well, actually, it is a problem when we create this name. We can check some symbols here, check some of these letters and symbols here, including some space problems. First of all, here, we're creating a user, right? When creating a user, the first thing we do is specify a variable for the username. There's no problem with that. Then we specify a group name. The group name is the group we created earlier, the one created above. When specifying the password, here the password is already set as a variable. This means we first generate the password using this variable, and then use a pipe to send it to the encryption method that follows, passing it to the encryption process that comes next. Next, we write the password expiration, specifying the exact validity period of the password validity period. What is the maximum value? A variable equal to the validity period of the password behind. Click on password. Maximum password value. Alright, the following loop is used to iterate through our user variables. Essentially, it loops through all our usernames once, and then through our conditional check, it determines when the position matches and executes the content described above. After going through everything here, if we look at its requirements, its prompt shows an error here. Of course, this error is actually not at the exact location. It's not the precise spot. Well, we can see that both node 1 and node 2 here report errors. So it has actually identified both nodes, node 1 and node 2. Both nodes have been identified. Both nodes are recognized, no problem. Let's take a look over here. It says that in the string of our template, what can't it find? It can't find the name. If it can't find the name, what it's mentioning here is that there is no available value, no value available. Let's take a look. First, we need to make sure there are no issues with the variables here. Also, regarding the previous question, in the previous question, we did generate 2 pieces of content. Which file was it at that time? It was this file, locker YML. This file does exist, so that's fine. It was generated correctly. Next, let's take a look at what we used when we created it back then. Because now we actually can't see what the names of those 2 variables were. You actually can't see it here anymore. Why is that? Because when we created it earlier, it actually wasn't created through a file, right? At that time, we didn't create it through a file, but through what? It was through our Ansible. It was created using the Ansible command, not by directly editing it with Vim. So here, we actually can't see the names of those 2 variables above anymore. Also, let's check whether the secret file is normal. This file was created in the last class. Wish app on a problem at all. There's absolutely nothing wrong with this either, right? This particular file is perfectly fine. If the file is fine, as we can clearly see, then there might be a slight issue elsewhere. Actually, it's when we use the Ansible command to generate something. So when we generated this key file, what did we use to create it at that time? We used locker YML to create it, right? It was created using this file. Here, what you're seeing is Ansible Vault being used to create a file. Ansible Vault is a tool that helps keep important information safe by encrypting files. In this step, it's making a new file that will be protected, so only people with the right password can access what's inside. There's a problem with the create step here. because this file already exists, it's already there. Let's take a look here. What are we supposed to do? We need to edit it. Use the edit method because it's already been created. The previous task created it. So let's edit it and see the result. We can check whether the variable in the previous question is correct. I think the variable from the previous task has a bit of a minor issue, just a small problem. There's a missing character here. Let's save it. After saving, let's take another look at the content inside. Of course, even though the content has changed here, it actually won't affect anything. In the end, what is it? It's just this kind of situation. However, we can see that the value has already changed. The value is now different from before. So our modification was successful. Next, let's run it again. So regarding this question, if there is an issue, what could be the reason? It could be that in the previous question, if you made a mistake with some variable names, it might cause problems in this question because as we can see here, the error reported is that the variable cannot be found. If the variable can't be found in this template, what does that mean? It means there's an issue with our variable value. It shows that I did indeed write the first variable value incorrectly earlier. Now let's run our script again. There shouldn't be any problem this time, since previously it couldn't find the variable value. What the variable actually is doesn't really matter. As long as it finds the variable value, it can be encrypted. It can proceed. You see, there's no problem here. As long as it has this variable value, it's fine, regardless of whether it's correct or not. This is our just take a look inside the test section under DEV. You just need to check whether the content is normal. For example, look at ours, we created these users, right? Check here to see if these users were created successfully. Okay, they're all here, right? They're all here except for one. Why is that? Well, because it's not on this node. Which node is it on? It's on Pro's top node. Yeah, let's take a look at the Pro node. Okay. Here we have Pro is also node. Which one was it? Node 3, right? Yeah, for the specified creation, let's look at this part. Okay. Our second one, who's the second one here? It's node 3. That's right. Node 3 has been created here. The first and second ones are on node 1 and node 2. The first user was created on node 1 and node 2, and the second user was created on... What about the 3 pictures created for node 3 and node 4? Node 3, node 4. Wait, is there an obvious mistake with the user? Let me check. Oh, the username here is clearly supposed to be SA Bob. Ah, here. I didn't see ITO. It's an error. It's an error. But it didn't completely throw an error here. It's because the last two did actually have errors. However, the first one here is displayed, you see. The user is present here. I didn't see it just now, but the user is indeed there. The user exists. For node 3 and node 4, you need to create this user. And for node 1 and node 2, who is it here? Ah, it's Bob and Fred. These two look here. Here, because most of them are errors, even the correct content for this question is shown as wrong. But in reality, we do have it. It actually exists. Maybe we just didn't see it. So when you see something in red here, it doesn't necessarily mean there's a problem. As for the yellow ones, generally, the yellow ones also have issues. Look here, right? It also shows an error here, saying that this user doesn't exist, which is true, because this user was created in node 3 and node 4, so this user definitely doesn't exist here. You see, the yellow ones aren't completely correct either. It seems like this side is correct, with more correct results, so there's no problem. Over here, most of them are errors, which is why this side turned red. As long as you make sure your users match up, that's fine. Generally, for this question, there won't be much change in the parameters. If there is, just pay attention to it yourself. If there are no parameter changes, just make sure that node 1 and node 2 have these two users, and node 3 and node 4 have this one user, and that's enough. There can only be this one user. If you have these two users showing up here, then that's actually incorrect. That's not right. So nodes 1 and 2 should have 2 users, and nodes 3 and 4 should have 1 user. That's it. This is the final answer. If yours is a bit different from this, just check your method of judgment above, and that should solve it. That's all for this question. Of course, there's one more point to mention. It's best to log in again, because besides users, what else do we have? User groups. Once we've confirmed there are no issues here, there's still the matter of the password. How do we verify the password? First, we can do this since we've already created the users, right? We can use remote login to check. When you try to log in remotely, see, it asks us to enter the user password, right? So here, whose password do we enter? Let's take a look. Here we use no problem. It's connected. Here we use the password I'm a dev. That's one. The other one is Sally. You can try logging in with her as well. Sally Deng is another node, right? Here you just need to try with 2 users. Here we use. Here the user logs into 12. That is IPv 10.2. For this one we use IMA. The password is MGR. Okay, no problem, right? Both can log in. To log out, you can use exit or Ctrl+D to log out. Either way works, as long as you can exit. So this is our question 16. There are actually quite a few things to pay attention to. First, you need to make sure the content from question 14 is correct. Mainly that the variables match up. Where did we make a mistake just now? Wasn't it because one of the variable names was written incorrectly? The variables must match exactly. As long as the variables are correct, your password will definitely be created. And as long as the password exists, that's fine. Okay, so this is question 15. Just pay attention to these points. Also, when you're verifying, right here, you see, there are mistakes in the yellow section, but there's one correct answer in the red section. Don't just see something in red and think, oh no, what should I do? There's an error. There's actually no error. This is correct. This is right. So that's our question 15. This is one method for creating a user account. All right. If you need the complete question bank, you can leave a comment below and get the most reliable question bank at the best price. That's all for today, everyone. Bye-bye.